America's economic horror show, brought to you by Oxford Gold Group.
You know why I didn't join the Navy? I'll explain in a minute. I'm going somewhere with this. We're talking about the world's situation, our situation. I'm going somewhere with this. But you want to know why I didn't join the Navy? There are many reasons, of course. One, both my parents are married. Two, I wanted to be a Marine. I always admired the Marines. But three, a big part of it, the helplessness of fighting on a ship. Let me explain. In the Marines, I'm in the infantry. I may not be in control. I'm not in control, but I at least feel somewhat in control. I can duck, I can shoot, I can move, I can dig in, I can control my own destiny. But in the Navy, if I'm on a big ship in combat somewhere, what am I in control of? Nothing. If we get hit, it's over. What do? You prepare. Part of the reason I talk about where we're at right now, planet-wise, nation-wise, where you're at, where I'm at, is we have to make preparations because we're on a ship. We're not in control of our own destiny. Very sadly, you can't control it. I can't control it. Our leadership is rotted to the core and disgusting. The world is chaotic, as we can see, as America begins to falter. Russia, Ukraine, Hamas, Hezbollah, Israel, China, Taiwan. There's all this insanity going on out there, and you can't control that. I can't control that. We're sitting here just cogs in the wheel, just on that ship, hoping and praying that nothing bad happens, but obviously it looks like it's going to. And look, I have to laugh when I hear people like Joe Biden get up and say things like this.
We have the strongest economy in the world today. The strongest economy in the world today. We have more to do. But we are the indispensable nation in the world, internationally and domestically, in terms of our economy.
Well, he's half right. You see, we're $33 trillion in debt. And it's not just that we're $33 trillion in debt. It's that we're adding $500 billion every few months. We're going to start adding $1 trillion before you know it, because of how it grows exponentially. We'll be adding $1 trillion every 6 months or so. Wrap your mind around how insane that is. We're not the strongest economy in the world. We are a business facing Chapter 11 bankruptcy. It is imminent. And this is not a left, right, middle thing. It's not Democrat, Republican. It is simply dollars and cents. The dollars, the exponential growth, the interest on the debt, these things don't lie. They can't be argued with. It cannot be argued. A debt crisis is coming. But let's talk about something that he did say that was pretty true. The indispensable nation of the world. If you've ever studied history or read any history books at all about the various powerful empires that have popped up in their regions, it's fascinating to study the empire. We all love that. And it's fascinating to study the empire's fall. We all love that. Oh man, the Ottomans, they rose and they fell. The Persians rose and they fell. The Romans rose and they fell. All these different nations. But what's fascinating, something really, really fascinating, is when you dig into what happens in that region once the big dog, once the superpower does fall. The complete another chaos that comes with it. Like Rome, I just brought up Rome. Rome forever owned the Middle East. And once they had conquered everything, they really had settled everything they needed to settle. And then you look at what happened later on. Once they'd split east-west, then Rome had been sacked and then taken back and sacked and taken back. And then you see Italy became this hell of war after war after war because chaos ensued. Well, that's what's happening right now on a global scale with America, because it's a global. Everything's global now because of transportation technology. As America falters, as the number one empire on the planet begins to lose its way, late stage empire and all that, chaos is coming. It's coming. Cannot be stopped. We're not on the gold standard. Chaos is coming. We are in trouble economically, and there's precious little you or I can do about the global situation or the American situation to save things. We can fight and we will fight, but there's precious little we can do. One thing we must do, though, is take care of ourselves. We must look to ourselves and our communities first. When Janet Yellen gets up and says this, do you believe her?
Look, we still have a good, healthy labor market. Consumer spending remains quite robust. We've seen strong industrial production. I don't see any signs that the economy is at risk of a downturn, and this is the best of all worlds.
That's obviously insane, but it should scare you because it shows the people who are supposed to be righting this ship, who are supposed to be giving us that soft landing, the people who are driving our Navy ship, they're all morons or evil or insane or all three, and that's most likely the answer. Well, you and me, where does that put us? In a bad spot. Look, do I need to remind everybody about energy prices and how they drive the financial situation? And do I need to remind you that the Biden administration, even with all the chaos going on in the world right now, scary this, terror here, invasion here, they haven't forgotten their number one priority.
Climate change is an existential threat. It actually threatens and is capable of wiping out all human life on Earth over time. I mean, I don't know how more existential you can get to that, but that doesn't mean that we walk away from our obligations, our national security interests in very dangerous parts of the world.
John,
You mentioned
he said it was more frightening than a nuclear war. Is that it's more frightening than a nuclear war in this moment?
The president believes wholeheartedly that climate change is an existential threat to all of human life on the planet. That's just science.
They're not going to slow down. They're not going to stop. And so having said all that, I want you to think about something. And this is, I almost don't want to tell you this because as soon as it occurred to me to start doing this, reading the news has gotten a bit more disheartening, but I want you to start doing this when you read the news. No matter what the story is, when you see the United States government is about to do something, whatever that something is, whether it's something you love, whether it's something you hate, they're sending money here, building this, passing this bill, whatever the government does, I want you to think about this. Here's a great example. Recently, 2 carrier groups heading to the Middle East. I want you to think about this. We're borrowing every penny it takes to pay for that. No matter what the news story is, I want you to just add this little addendum to every single thing you see. We borrowed money for this. We borrowed money for this. We borrowed money for this. And hardly anybody seems to be talking about it. And look, his motivations, who knows what they were, but at the very least, credit to Matt Gaetz for at least bringing up the fact that there's no money left.
I don't think voting against Kevin McCarthy is chaos. I think $33 trillion in debt is chaos. I think that facing a $2.2 trillion annual deficit is chaos. I think that not passing single subject spending bills is chaos. I think the fact that we have been governed in this country since the mid-90s by continuing resolution and omnibus is chaos. And the way to liberate ourselves from that is a series of reforms.
Where is he wrong? I mean, look, $4.1 billion in grants. Latest and greatest, sent worldwide for LGBT initiatives. Yeah, I'm not making that up. You currently are funding a youth musical in France about the war in Ukraine, and we borrowed money for that. We borrowed money for that. Okay, so that's all the bad. That's all the scary. What do? You're on the ship. Nothing we can do about it. You join the Navy, you're on the ship. What do we do about that now? Well, we have to prepare for the ship to go down. We have to assume things are going to go bad, and you and me, we're going to end up in the water. Okay, well, we can't suck our thumb. We have to make preparations. What preparations? It's time to start acquiring things these people don't have the ability to destroy the value of. because they'll destroy everything they can. You know what they can't destroy the value of? Precious metals. They can't. You can touch and feel them. I can take gold, I can take silver, a little sack of it, whatever, and I can go 2,000, 5,000 years ago, and I will have buying power. Isn't that amazing? Put me anywhere on the planet 2,000 years ago with a bag of gold, and I can go purchase whatever goods and services I please. And 5,000 years in the future will be the same. Lasting value and wealth, the worst people in the world can't touch. Gold, silver, it's your life raft. You're on the ship, you better get in the life raft. You better get a hold of Oxford. Oxford, I'm not talking gold bars and crazy stuff like that. I'm talking basic preparations. They'll get gold coins, silver coins in your hands. You don't need a bank vault or anything like that. This is all stuff that's mailed to your front door, insured, you're totally covered. You don't need anything special for it. This is basics for you. Get it as part of your retirement account so you don't get wiped out. Basics. Get a life jacket on. Get in the life raft. You are helpless. I am helpless. We can't do anything about what they're doing to us except make preparations. This is how we make preparations. Go to jessekellygold.com and make those preparations now. jessekellygold.com. We'll be back with Steve Cortes.
America's Economic Horror Show, brought to you by Oxford Gold Group. America's Economic Horror Show, brought to you by Oxford Gold Group.
There seems to be a disconnect between the numbers we're seeing and the way people are feeling about the economy, and how do you account for it?
I agree with you that there's a disconnect, and I don't have a simple and convincing answer.
I have a simple and convincing answer. It's actually quite simple. If you are at an income level, and I hope you are, all right, go make all your money. If you are at an income level where 20% increase in your cost of living doesn't affect your standard of living, you think the economy is doing just fine. If you're not, you do. Pretty simple. Joining me now, my buddy Steve Cortes. He is the founder of the League of American Workers and, of course, host of the Steve Cortes Show. Steve, I don't know why these Janet Yellen types are so confused. It really is quite easy. Normal people, when they struggle to buy gas and eggs, they don't think the economy is doing very well.
Right. You're exactly correct. For her to say that there's a disconnect, the disconnect is between people like her, the power brokers of Washington, D.C., and the millions, tens of millions of regular Americans who are struggling to simply afford the necessities of life. And you're exactly correct about inflation. It's harmful for everybody, but the bite, of course, is far more severe for those of modest means. For the law partner, he might be annoyed that filling up his luxury SUV costs more, but it doesn't change his life. But for the single mom waitress who has a long drive to her restaurant to work, those added gasoline costs are absolutely stifling. I would also note, by the way, that's the same Janet Yellen who, appears to be confused right now, who told us over and over as this inflation was building that it was, quote, transitory. She either didn't know what she was talking about, or more likely, she completely lied to the American people for political partisan reasons. And for that past and for that lack of honesty with the American people, I believe she's totally unsuited to be the Secretary of the Treasury at any moment, but especially at a moment like this, Jesse, of intense economic anxiety in the country.
Steve, I'm worried most Americans, understandably, don't really get how bad this debt crisis is about to be. They don't just understand how it grows exponentially here at the end. When you get to the point where you're adding $1 trillion every 3 months, Steve, we're not talking years. We're not talking 20 years from now there's a debt crisis. Brother, this thing is coming, and it's coming soon. And I feel like no one really knows.
Right. No, it's here, Jesse. That's the unfortunate reality. Because of the previous era of low interest rates, which were really artificially suppressed by the Federal Reserve and central banks all over the world. But because of that, our out of control debt was somewhat manageable. I say somewhat because it was always a bad idea, but we could at least afford the debt service payments because interest rates were so low. We have exactly the opposite scenario right now. And I provided a chart for your folks if we can show that what has happened in interest rates since the lockdowns. And this is the key. I think we need to realize that the birth of this inflation, it's been bad under Biden, but the real birth of it is the lockdowns as shown on that chart the quote 15 days to slow the spread. In March of 2020, interest rates on 10-year Treasury notes, which is the benchmark interest rate for all interest rates in the country, it was then below 1%, Jesse. It was 0.8% for a 10-year note. As that chart shows, it has climbed and climbed and climbed ever since. It's almost now at 5%. So it is 6 times higher than it was because of our exorbitant borrowing and spending, combined with the treachery, the economic pain and misery of Bidenomics. And what we now have is, because of our debt that is now galloped well north of $30 trillion, as we are rolling that debt over into a much higher interest rate situation and regime, the reality is right now, today, not going forward, not a projection. Today, we're spending on an annualized basis almost $1 trillion in debt servicing costs. That is totally unsustainable, and it's only going to get worse unless we take massive corrective action.
Which will not happen. We all know that, Steve. These people will sit and they'll just wring their hands and tear their hair out for 24 hours because some guy lost his speakership, yet there have been no emergency meetings about the $33 trillion in debt. So let's assume nothing's going to be done. Steve, what exactly does it look like when that debt crisis finally gets here?
Yeah, well, it looks terrible. Look, Americans will continue to lose their standard of living. That's the reality. Their buying power will continue to be diminished. And let me give you one example that is already front and center, and that is the housing affordability crisis in America. Because of the spike in interest rates and because of what it has done to mortgages, and because a lot of wealthy people and a lot of institutional capital wants to invest in homes, in single family homes, something we've never seen before in American history, institutional money going into that market. Why are they going there? Because they view these tangible goods of a house, it's a lot like crude oil, it's something tangible and physical, as protection against inflation. So you have high prices for housing and that are sustained, unfortunately, as high prices, combined with incredibly expensive mortgages that very few Americans can afford. And it's to the point where now, Jesse, even according to CBS News, even the biased corporate media is starting to admit this. They published a report that in 99% of the communities in America, a median earning worker cannot afford to buy a home in their community. So it's bad now. It is going to certainly get worse. And not only will you not be able to buy a home in the near future, you won't be able to buy just the goods you need to live your life. I mean, the absolute basics like food and utilities. So that's the reality. You know, America hasn't experienced inflation really at all before this current crisis since the 1970s. And we really haven't had hyperinflation in all of our history. But if we look at what it's done to a lot of other countries, formerly stable, rich countries, places like Argentina, which a century ago was wealthier than the United States, hyperinflation has ruined that country in many ways. And we shouldn't presume that it can't happen here, that we can't be Argentina or we can't become Venezuela. We can't have societal discording and chaos because of sustained inflation. It's entirely possible, and I think, unfortunately, probable.
I think it's probable too. Steve, another part of it we don't talk about because it's harder to quantify, it's hard to make the connection for people who don't understand the issue, is illegal immigration. You cannot flood a nation with millions of people and then support those people and not have that contribute to a really bad economic situation. People don't make the connection, but there is one.
Absolutely. No, listen, I'm so glad you mentioned this, and on several fronts. First of all, these folks, most of them are coming here to work. They are trespassing into our nation uninvited and unvetted, but I will at least say most of them come here with the intention, of course, to work. Well, they are engaging then in competition with American citizens in the labor market. And because of their status, they are always willing to work for lower wages than American citizens are. So Americans have crashing real wages, meaning their income adjusted for inflation has been crashing under Joe Biden. That situation is badly exacerbated by these millions of unjust workers competing in the labor market against American citizens. And then, of course, getting back to the housing, which we were just speaking about. These people need to be housed. We are paying for them to be housed, and in many cases paying top dollar, housing them, for example, at luxury hotels in New York City. But wherever these millions and millions of people are, whether it's a hotel or a home, the point is, this is an incredible added stress on an already unaffordable U.S. housing market. So you're exactly correct. The open border is terrible for so many reasons. It's a danger to our streets. It's a danger to national security. But it is absolutely also an economic harm to this country. And in a time of inflation, it's never a good time to tolerate an open border. But it's a particularly terrible time in a time of inflation and intense economic anxiety across the land. That's totally warranted anxiety to then allow and, in fact, invite millions of unvetted, unwelcome and illegal aliens into this country. It's absolutely part of the inflation crisis.
Steve, another crisis is the personal debt one, and this is the one that just floors me. Lowest savings in, I think, ever or in years, highest credit card debt ever. Americans are personally going bankrupt as the country is going bankrupt. What is happening here?
No, that's exactly right. So unfortunately, stressed Americans who cannot afford the necessities of life, they are turning to credit cards, which we know is a very dangerous game. Credit card interest rates have been soaring along with all interest rates. And not surprisingly right now, delinquency rates are rising at the fastest rate since the 08-09 financial crisis. We have $1 trillion now in total credit card debt for the first time ever in American history. We have passed that ignoble mark. And that debt at increasingly high interest rates is putting even more stress on the American consumer and on American citizens. So yeah, unfortunately, look, the debt situation is terrible at the government level, at the federal level. It's also terrible at the personal level. And I firmly believe, by the way, that this is the biggest opportunity for conservative candidates and for Republican candidates to win into the 2024 elections. Focus on these bread and butter, kitchen table economic issues, because a lot of folks who might not be all that conservative, might not agree with us on the right on things like, say, pro-life. But when they cannot pay their bills and when they are stressed out about a credit card balance that they can't deal with, I think they're willing to overlook perhaps some of the other issues where they may not be in agreement with us and say, listen, the Republicans and conservatives can deliver a better economy and economic healing right now because it's badly, badly needed. The country is in a miserable mood, which is totally understandable. Bidenomics has been an absolute abject failure for all except for the very highest end of society. And it's an opportunity, though. I mean, it's terrible that's happened in this country, but it's also political opportunity. And I hope, now listen, as you know, Jesse, leave it to Republicans to screw up a good hand. Okay, so they'll find a way, a lot of these candidates. But the table is set for significant political gains because of the economic pain.
Yeah, well, let's hope so. Steve, thank you, brother. I appreciate it.
Jesse, appreciate it. Thank you.
What do you know? People with means, what are they buying up right now? Hard assets. Guess what China is buying up right now? Hard assets. We'll talk about that. Hang on.
America's Economic Horror Show, brought to you by Oxford Gold Group. America's Economic Horror Show, brought to you by Oxford Gold Group.
What is the deal with China and their economy? I've always found it to be very fascinating. We hear all the time that they have this big economy. It's almost as big as ours. And then we hear about them devaluing their currency, and they're spreading money all over Africa, spending money on whole cities that go uninhabited in their own countries. Surely that money's running out. I don't know what's going on. I bet EJ does. Joining me now, EJ Antoni. He is a PhD economist from the Heritage Foundation, so he's got to know. Okay, EJ, what is the status with China's economy? Is it this gigantic juggernaut that's going to steamroll us? Is it a balloon that's about to pop? What is it?
Well, unlike inflation, it actually really is transitory. It has been a juggernaut for many years, Jesse, and that has been fueled largely by debt. And what's happening now is that debt comes due and the Chinese government is unable to pay it. Things are starting to collapse, whether it's the manufacturing sector or real estate. The largest real estate developer in the world out of China just recently collapsed and is currently in bankruptcy now. And I think that's a foretaste of what is to come for much of the Chinese economy. It's also, by the way, Jesse, and more importantly, I think, a warning to us here in the United States that this is what ultimately happens with government central planning of economies.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up, and I want you to explain this to everybody who doesn't have a PhD in economics. What does funded it with debt mean?
So what the Chinese government has done under President Xi is to essentially just issue debt, promises to pay in the future. And what that did is it devalued the currency because those debt instruments were essentially traded like they were currency. In other words, it had the exact same effect as if the Federal Reserve here in the United States just simply printed a bunch of money, exactly what we've seen over the last 3 years. So the consequence of that was almost like a tissue fire. It burned hot and fast very quickly, and then it died out, and there's nothing left after that. In other words, there's not real growth behind it. People simply felt rich because they had a lot of money, but they're starting to realize that the money is not worth what they thought it was.
EJ, how do people live in China? Obviously, we see plenty of videos from the cities. You can see all the Orwellian surveillance state stuff, but 90% of China is rural. What is the economic situation like for normal people there?
Well, for normal people, just about 20 years ago, a lot of Americans don't understand this, but China had an incredibly large number of people still living in caves only 2 decades ago. In fact, at that time, you had about the size of the United States population in China still living in caves. They have made a tremendous amount of progress. And in exchange for that progress, the Chinese government has built up this surveillance state, which many Chinese citizens have tolerated because of the incredible economic prosperity that they've had. But as China has shifted away from free market capitalism and towards socialism and central planning, that economic growth is stalling out, which is creating an increasing level of frustration among the people who now not only still have to deal with that surveillance state, they have to deal with that Orwellian conditions where they have things like a social credit score. There are cameras everywhere monitoring their every move, not just in public, but in private as well. So not only do they have that, but now the dreams of things like home ownership have completely vanished.
Okay, I'm glad you brought up home ownership because you brought up the real estate bubble. Can you explain this empty city thing, which I can't wrap my head around, EJ? You read these articles, you see these news stories about entire cities, and not small ones, that are empty. Who built an empty city? And then they're demoing an empty city. What happened?
Jesse, this is such a great question because it ties together so many of the things that we're talking about here. You have some bureaucrat in Beijing who decides, wouldn't it be great if there was a city right here, and he puts a pin in a map, and then they literally set about with a commission to develop an entire city in an area where literally no one lives, where there's nothing exists. And they say, we're going to build up all this farmland around it. We're going to create this model city, et cetera, et cetera. And to fund that, what did the Chinese government do? Well, they issued a bunch of debt, essentially fake money, to pay for all of that construction. And then once all these cities were built, the Chinese government, after also instituting a one-child policy, which had the disastrous effect of collapsing their birth rate, they all of a sudden realized, it turns out we don't have a whole generation of people who can actually inhabit this city. And as a result, you have, again, literally cities that are empty, as you pointed out, these not just ghost towns like we had out west, but ghost cities. And the Chinese government is having to turn around and now bulldoze all of those things that they just built.
EJ, why are they buying up so much gold? I feel like every day when I'm thumbing through economic news, China's buying gold, just hoarding this stuff. What's going on?
Well, Jesse, I think China and a lot of other countries too, whether it's Russia, Saudi Arabia, you name it, we have a lot of countries, even Brazil in our own hemisphere, who are buying up gold. And some of these central banks are actually buying gold at the fastest annual rates ever. So it's not as if this is simply a continuation of an existing trend. The reason for that has in large part to do with the dollar losing its value, not just because of inflation, but also because of what the Biden administration has done to it overseas. People simply do not trust the United States dollar anymore. It is no longer an apolitical money mechanism. Look at what they did to Russia, for example. They confiscated dollars that were owned not by us, but by the Russian central bank and the Russian people. Now, this is not in any way to justify anything that Vladimir Putin has done. That's not the point. The point is that the dollar is no longer apolitical, and people now believe, rightly so, that the American government may seize their dollar reserves if they do something with which the Biden administration doesn't agree, whether those are anti-sodomy laws in Africa or pro-life laws in Eastern Europe or other countries anywhere around the world that are simply not implementing the Green New Deal. The Biden administration is threatening all kinds of sanctions against all of these different countries. And so everyone is looking for an alternative, and gold for almost all of human history has proven to be that alternative. And we may see countries going back to it now.
EJ, thank you so much, man. I appreciate it.
No, thank you for having me.
Of course. You see, we need to do exactly what other nation states around the world are doing. We have to, you and me. We have drained our savings, and Americans right now, it's the normal thing to do. It's what I'm doing too, right? You have a 401k, you have an IRA. Well, you need gold in that too. You need physical gold and silver in your possession. Oxford Gold will mail it to you. That's cake. You need to get it in your IRA, in your 401k. That is a no-brainer. As the world moves off the dollar, we need to pay attention to what central banks are doing, China's doing. What are these big, smart entities doing who understand what time it is? They're buying up precious metals. And it's really easy. Oxford makes this easy. It's fast, it's free, the shipping. Call them. 833-995-GOLD. 833-995-GOLD. We'll be back.
America's Economic Horror Show, brought to you by Oxford Gold Group. America's Economic Horror Show, brought to you by Oxford Gold Group.
Iran gets together with Saudi Arabia through China. And China's taken over. And China, I heard a couple of people say, well, the dollar will never lose the dollar standard. Are they kidding? China wants to change the standard, the currency standard. And if that happens, that's like losing a world war. We'll be a second-tier country. We'll literally be a second-tier country if that happens.
Sobering, but very, very true. Joining me now, Peter C. Earle. He's an economist, of course. He's an author of the book, The Gold Standard. Okay, Peter, explain in a way an expert can that I cannot, what it means for the normal American if the world moves off of the dollar, which we're currently destroying the value of.
Sure. Thanks for having me. So the impact on the regular consumer, if the dollar were to be either replaced as the global currency standard, as the global reserve currency, or even if it were to lose substantial market share, wouldn't be seen immediately. It would take some time. But what would happen is, first of all, the dollar would lose value because there would be less demand for it in favor of whatever took its place. And the other thing is that over time, one of the reasons why there's so much demand for U.S. treasuries is because nations that use the dollar want to keep the dollar in instruments that provide return, that have an interest rate associated with them, that have yield. So first it would be the effect on the dollar, but then we probably the U.S. wouldn't have the market for debt that it has now with less use of the dollar. So it would take a while, but I think the consequences would be pretty substantial, and everyone would feel it everywhere in the world.
How would the normal person feel it? That's how people hear that and they think, okay, well, the government has to spend less on stupid things. What's the end of the world? Well, how's Joe Schmo feel it?
Well, if the dollar were to lose value because of less demand, it would feel like inflation. It would feel like your dollar is losing purchasing power. And also, there's a lot of things right now which even the average person has become very accustomed to, which are probably paid for either by inflating the dollar or taxes or debt. And by the way, if there were to be less of a market for U.S. debt because of less use of the U.S. dollar, that would mean your taxes would have to go up because you're not going to get the U.S. government to spend less unless it's a real disaster. And as long as they can either print more money or tax you more, they're not going to worry that much about less of a market for our debt.
Peter, you mentioned moving off the dollar. They, of course, have to have something to move off to. And many people, everyone who watches this show, has heard about BRICS. And how dangerous is this movement? I'm not under the impression we're going to move on to BRICS tomorrow and we're all screwed. From my understanding, we're a ways away from that. But these are some big boy nations behind this movement. Is this what it's going to be in the end? Is it going to be BRICS?
Yeah, so initially BRICS was Brazil, Russia, India, China, then South Africa joined them. But more recently, they took on another 6 members. There's Saudi Arabia, the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia, and Argentina. And what that means is that this is a group that's very, very heavy in commodities. And they, by some measures, they represent about 50% of world GDP. So the thought is if they will start pricing things like oil or copper or other commodities more in whatever they choose as a replacement currency, or even if they begin to trade more in gold, that could have the effect of sort of shuffling the dollar out of the way, giving more currency, giving, no pun intended, giving more sort of use to another currency, whatever that might be. It's hard to say what it'll be. None of the currencies of any of the BRIC nations are particularly good replacements for the dollar. But I mean, conceivably, if they come up with something and they can sort of stick to it for a while, and it can get sort of those network effects of wide usage, they could make a dent in the use of the U.S. dollar. It took the euro about 20 years to replace about, I think, 25% of the dollar's use. So, again, these aren't things that are going to happen tomorrow. They would take, years, maybe even decades, but there are very real possibilities, and there are things that provide, opportunities for some of our enemies to get the upper hand on us.
I'm very concerned about what you just mentioned, and that's the gold part. Now, I'm not concerned about gold. I love gold. I encourage people to buy it every chance they get. I'm concerned about China, a nation state like China, acquiring so much of it. It sure seems like they feel like that's the future.
Yeah, in fact, over the last 2 years, we've had record amounts of buying of gold by central banks. Now, the reason for that has a lot to do with, actually, it's really tied to the reason for de-dollarization as well. First of all, we have the Fed making lots and lots of mistakes since 2020. They created trillions of dollars in the start of the pandemic. And then when we started to get inflation, they waited too long. They called it transitory. And then when they did act, they acted with such aggression that they destroyed a few community banks, and now they're wrestling to get inflation back in line. And we have yields on Treasury bonds rising, to levels we haven't seen since the Clinton administration. And we have rates on loans going up and record defaults. So a whole bunch of mistakes by the Federal Reserve have led a lot of nations to buy gold. Then additionally, we had the decision of various authorities to kick Russia out of the SWIFT system upon the invasion of Ukraine. And whatever you think about that, what it did was it led a lot of nations, including some of our allies, to say, hey, I didn't realize that using the dollar for so much international trade was actually such an existential risk. So for those two reasons, a lot of central banks have been buying gold, and they've been buying it at such a rate that there's a thought that if they wanted to in an emergency, they could use some method, some means of trading gold as a replacement for the dollar, but probably a temporary replacement until they found something different.
Can you talk about cryptocurrency? I personally have never dabbled in it. I don't trust it, but that's because I don't know it. I'm certainly no expert on it, but you see all these, Bitcoin and crypto, and I don't understand it. I believe in things you can touch and feel. I always have. I always will. Is this industry going to die, going to grow? What is it?
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because one of the observations many people have made is that it seems to always be on the threshold of death until it runs another 10,000%, and then it's very cyclical. You're right. The thing about crypto is that there are many cryptocurrencies that are not real cryptos. I mean, some of them are just tokens, and some of them are kind of a scam. Bitcoin is a real cryptocurrency for several reasons. It's algorithmically limited. It's a peer-to-peer cash system. You can read all the white papers and stuff about that. Those cryptocurrencies will never be a replacement for the dollar. They may be used when a nation gets in trouble. We saw crypto use when Venezuela and some other nations fell into monetary hardships because of their vastly and destructively expansionist monetary policies that created lots of inflation. But the thing is, governments don't really like crypto because they can't control it. because of the algorithmic limitations, there's never going to be more than, say, I believe it's 21.7 million Bitcoin. And what governments like to do, and the whole reason why Bitcoin came about, is that governments like to expand their currency when they want more money. And then when they develop inflation, they like to contract the currency stock. So cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin in particular, could be sort of like a life preserver, a life raft, if you will, when nations get into trouble. But they're never going to replace currencies. Even currencies like, the Chinese yuan or the Indian rupee, those are never going to be replaced by crypto because governments can't control them the way they'd like to.
A lot of people have forgotten about the gold standard. The gold standard. Mm-hmm. You write about this. What was the gold standard and why the heck would we ever leave it?
There's a lot of answers to that question. Now, the gold standard, there's been several gold standards. The original one we're usually talking, when we talk about the gold standard, is the classical gold standard, and that's what I've written about some. And that basically was a convertibility standard where your dollar was defined in terms of some weight and fineness of gold. And conceivably, you could go to a bank and you could trade in your dollar for gold, or you could trade in gold for a dollar. And what that does is that makes it such that, first of all, the amount of currency in circulation is limited, which means it's very hard for governments to inflate and deflate. There was a very, very low level of inflation under gold currencies, but not very much. Certainly nothing compared to what we've had today. And it also means that I can sort of, I myself and citizens can sort of keep the government in line. If the government sees, if the government seems to be doing something that's going to create inflation, we're going to convert those dollars to gold. So we have that hard currency, something a commodity that's held its value for thousands of years. Now that's the classical gold standard. And that was very good for many hundreds of years. There's reasons why governments went off it, mostly because they wanted to be able to create an elastic currency that they could expand and contract at will. Some people would say that they had benign reasons for that. They wanted to be able to expand the currency in the when we were a more agricultural nation, you might want more currency before the harvest or after the harvest. We had banking panics, but if you look at the historical record, inflation, the volatility of the currency, the fluctuations in economic growth, all that stuff, it's all been vastly worse since 1914, and especially since 1971, when we severed the very last link between the dollar and gold. Things have been out of control. We've had more frequent financial panics. Those financial panics have been deeper. We've had the growth of these sort of mega banks that don't seem to be killable, and they don't seem to be replaced by mergers and acquisitions. There's any number of things which have happened. We've turned from a nation of savers into a nation of spenders. Anything you could name, so many different really pernicious things have happened since we severed the last link between gold and the dollar in 1971.
Peter, finally, a lot of people are under the impression that if they want to own some gold, that they have to have a Fort Knox bank vault in their backyard with gold bars like Bob Menendez. And that's not the case at all. This is a common thing and a thing people should be doing, isn't it?
Well, I mean, there's a certain logic and there's a certain sort of wisdom that says that people should be ready for what happens. I mean, I'm not a financial advisor, but certainly having a little bit of gold, a little bit of silver is still part of many cultures outside the United States. And many people view that as something they could do so that if everything were to go to hell in a handbasket, they would have something of hard value that could be exchanged for money or that can be used in trade and something like that. You don't, I don't think, need to do anything special, but certainly like anything valuable, you'd want to keep it secured. And again, I think that, for a lot of this wisdom, we have to look not even back to our parents and grandparents, but our great-grandparents. And many of us who have families that came from overseas, we know that they brought gold and silver with them. So, a lot of the things that we've been told are no longer necessary, are necessary. We've just been sort of blinded to it by this idea that paper money, is an improvement and that it's a sign of economic maturity or whatever. None of that is true. We are still as vulnerable to inflation and to the failures of government as we ever have been. Probably even more so now that government plays a major role in our lives.
Yeah. Peter, thank you so much, sir. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right. I have final thoughts. Buy some gold. No, that's not my final thought, but yes, buy some gold. Get a hold of Oxford, please. JesseKellyGold.com. Anyway, final thoughts next.
America's Economic Horror Show, brought to you by Oxford Gold Group. America's Economic Horror Show, brought to you by Oxford Gold Group.
When times are bad, we don't cry, we don't complain, we don't suck our thumb. Okay, we might do all three of those things, but briefly, then we have to, suck it up and stand up and do something about it. Make preparations for the fact that the worst people in the planet are running our country. They're frankly running the West right now. The worst people, dumbest people, most evil people are running the West. Now, let's make preparations for them destroying everything, because that's what they're doing. Those preparations involve precious metals. Get them. Anyone, normal people. This is not for millionaires and billionaires. This is not for Richie Rich. This is for you. Get some gold in your physical possession. Gold coins, silver coins, doesn't matter. I don't care what color it is. Get something in your hands these people can't destroy. JesseKellyGold.com. Go get some, all right? All right, we'll do it again.
America's Economic Horror Show, brought to you by Oxford Gold Group.